I was actually supposed to go when I was 15, but my dad thought that would not be a great experience. So I get there, and I don't drive or anything like that. So my mom would come pick me up. My mom is an interesting cat. I've never seen her afraid to try anything. So I decided to stay, and I never told Stanford I wasn't coming, so there's somebody waiting for their TA to show up still. I saw the independent music sector really disproportionately negatively affected. We had an insight that said, if you could do that, then you would have transformed creative discovery. So how hard could it be for us to do a startup, really? And she's like, I think I've heard this before. One of the things that's hard about fundraising is that you hear a lot of no's. Ultimately, when I look back at my life, I'm always going to look back at that and feel like we did a great thing.
What's up, Unfound Nation? Dan Kihanya here. Thanks so much for checking out another episode of Founders Unfound. That was Kirt Debique, founder and CEO of SyncFloor, a company revolutionizing discovery and acquisition of music for productions of all types, from advertising and podcasting, to filmmaking, to fitness, to eSports and TV. This platform is so cool that we, at Founders Unfound, chose the music for this episode from SyncFloor's dedicated site, songsforpodcasters.com. Kirt is a native of Trinidad, a former fast-rising exec at Microsoft, and the creator of his own indie music label. Kirt's story is amazing, and it starts with him coming to the US for college at 16. Our episode is sponsored by Black Women Talk Tech, an organization created to identify, encourage, and support Black women throughout the tech startup landscape. They are hosting their Face of the Founders Summit on November 17th, bringing together entrepreneurs, investors, and partners. Registration is free, but spots are limited. You don't want to miss it, so sign up for this tremendous experience today. Find out more in the show notes, or go to bit.ly/FOF Summit. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/FOF Summit. If you're a new listener to Founders Unfound, we've got something special for all the Black founders out there who are underestimated and undercelebrated. There's another way to get onto our podcast. Just leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or at podchaser.com. If you do this and identify yourself as a Black founder, I will read your review in an upcoming episode. So make sure to plug your company, URL, and all the relevant handles. We really appreciate your support for our mission. For this episode, I want to give a shout out and a big thank you to Jessica Sanan, who gave us 5 stars and wrote, "Finally, a platform where I am able to hear inspirational stories that keep me motivated as an entrepreneur. Keep these stories coming." Thank you so much, Jessica. That was great. Jessica's organization, Systemic Flow, focuses on STEM education for women of color. This is a cool organization that prioritizes not just learning, but also access to opportunity and fostering dreams and aspirations. Find out more at systemicflow.com or at systemic_flow on Instagram and Twitter, or simply at systemicflow on LinkedIn and Facebook. And Systemic is SYSTEMIC. Be sure to check out the many ways to support Jessica and her mission. Wasn't that great? Now's your chance. Head over to Apple or Podchaser and drop us a review. Now, on with the episode. Stay safe and hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to Founders Unfound, spotlighting the best startups you don't know yet. We bring you stories of exceptional founders from underrepresented backgrounds. This is episode number 22 in our series on founders of African descent. I'm your host, Dan Kihanya. Let's get on it. Today we have Kirt Debique, co-founder and CEO of SyncFloor, a company revolutionizing discovery and acquisition of music for productions of all types, from advertising to podcasting, filmmaking to fitness, TV to eSports. Welcome to the show, Kirt. We're super excited to have you on.
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really excited to get into it.
So first, let's help the listeners understand exactly what SyncFloor is all about.
So our mission is to connect creatives to the music they love to enhance the stories that they tell. We do that by connecting them through our marketplace of commercial music from the independent music sector in the industry from all around the world. And we do that for productions of all kinds, whether it's an ad production or a film or a TV show or a podcast. We're here to make it really, really simple and intuitive for you to find the music that you want that fits your creative and lifts your narrative, and to acquire that music, acquire the rights to that music to use in your production.
That's awesome. And as a podcaster, I can tell you this is definitely something that needed to be addressed. as a layman, we often struggle as what does it mean to have rights and where do you get music and how does it work? So super excited to delve more into SyncFloor and what it's all about and how it works. But let's start off with understanding a little bit about you. Where did you come from? Where did you grow up?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So I am from Trinidad and Tobago, a little island 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela, 10 degrees north of the equator. And I grew up there until I was 16 years old, at which point I came to the States to go to college at University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida.
You went when you were 16?
Yes.
16?
Yeah, I was actually supposed to go when I was 15, but my dad thought that would not be a great experience for anybody. So he was like, you should wait a year.
Okay, so hang on. So were you just ahead and advanced, or is it the system in Trinidad that just prepared you at that age to go into college?
Yeah, it's a couple of different things. You know, the education system in Trinidad is really great, and so structurally it's set up that, you know, somebody who gets out of, you know, what we call fifth form and does, you know, O levels, the exams you take to get your certification in various subjects, by the time you're done with that, you're really at a point where you could take the equivalent of, you know, or take the SATs, right, you know, and look to get admission to college. And that typically happens when somebody's like, you know, sort of 16, 17, you know, in Trinidad. I happen to also skip grade and or the equivalent of a grade, because I was in sort of the school that I went to had a lot of streaming, so they tested you constantly, and as you do all these different subjects, and so at one point they said, okay, you're going to skip one of the years and go further ahead. That's how come I ended up at 15 being at a point where I could actually go ahead and do that. But you know, like I said, I think. And I think reasonably so, my dad thought that, hey, you know what? You know, you're just not, you know, sort of emotionally prepared for making that leap at 15. And so let's, you know, take a year, did an additional year of school, and, you know, kind of just got to a point to wrap my head around.
You must have been bored out of your mind.
No, you know what? It was actually a pretty fantastic year, actually, honestly. You know, because I was, you know, so you imagine you're a kid, you're 15, going on 16. You're like, okay, I know I'm going to go to college in a year. And I think fairly early on I had, you know, sort of my setup in terms of like, you know, I had the scholarship to go and blah, 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 and all that type of stuff. So really I was just doing a year.
That's pretty cool. But I can imagine, I mean, my dad came to this country to go to college when he was actually 20, I think. So coming in at 16, you're still younger than the folks that are matriculating. You're culturally acclimatizing to the United States. That's
right.
So what was that like? I mean, were you in shock, or you were just like, well, this is cool, I'm just gonna roll with it?
It was wild on a number of different dimensions. You know, in terms of, you know, keeping up with the curriculum, that part was fine. I think I'd been essentially trained my whole life to, you know, sort of academically go do, you know, stuff ahead of where I was or supposed to be. So that was not the issue, but definitely culturally, you know, one good thing was that going to Miami, you know, Miami is a destination for, you know, immigrants from the kind of where I'm from, lots. So it, you know, there were parts of it that just, you know, don't feel completely crazily off. You know, I wasn't necessarily going into deep winter in the Midwest or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, so being in Miami was good from that perspective, but still going to a different place, going to the States and being around people who are definitely at a different place, you know, emotionally, culturally, you know, maturity wise on certain dimensions was definitely something to get used to. I think you know, one thing that was helpful for me is that I pretty early on found, you know, my people, in that I found a job in the computer center there. And, you know, I was going to school to do computer engineering. I was already pretty fascinated with software and writing software and computers and stuff like that. And so I actually went to the computer center and I just started working. Like, and the guy who ran the computer center came in one day and he was just like, who's that guy? Did we hire that guy? And they were like, I don't know. He's this guy. He came in and he just started like helping people out and their stuff and going behind the desk and getting printouts and stuff. And like, he just started working. You know? So we were like, okay, I guess maybe he's supposed to be here. And he was like, he came and talked to me and he's like, so what are you doing? And I was just like, I don't know, I like this stuff. So I'm helping out. And he's like, I tell you what, we can't actually hire you because, you know, on my visa and all that, we can't actually hire you until you do one semester. but at the end of the semester, we'll hire you. It'll be fine. And so I was like, sweet. And so, I found my people and I, started, doing computer engineering, working at the computer center. The other fun thing is that I get there and can't drive or anything like that. So my mom would come pick me up.
While you're in college, your mom would come and pick you.
Yeah. So I would have to wait. I would have to wait outside the music school actually for her to come pick me up. And so I'd meet all these like people from the music school as well, would probably also sort of, put a certain set of things into my pool and psyche, so.
Sure. Serendipity there for sure.
There you go. Exactly. So computers and music were mixing really early on,
Yeah, there you go. I was going to ask about that. Growing up in Trinidad, were you around music? Did you play music?
I was certainly around music a lot. On my mom's side especially is a fairly musical family. There are a lot of singers and stuff like that. And there's of course the very typical thing culturally where, you grew up doing that in church, but also just, sort of singing at different kinds of events and stuff like that. That was always around. And then, growing up for me, in Trinidad, at least you were exposed certainly to a lot of the top 100, top 40, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. I remember very distinctly a weekend radio show. It was, they would rebroadcast sort of a top 100 countdown from the States on one of the radio stations. And so I remember that being like a weekend thing, as you'd be, during the day doing your chores, doing whatever, and you'd be listening to, this countdown. And so, you could definitely expose to a lot of, the mainstream music of the day.
So you matriculate through University of Miami, which is an amazing thing still. So you came to Microsoft, which is about as far away from Miami as you can be in the continental United States here in the Seattle area. How do you end up at a place like Microsoft?
So it's a bit of a story. I was doing computer engineering and some of my friends there, in fact, a particular friend of mine, Eduardo. So Microsoft has this internship program, right? They run during the summers, right? It was a pretty big thing, that they would bring interns, and it was paid internships. It was really great stuff. And you get to work on real stuff and you learn a ton and all that. So anyway, one of my friends, he had done an internship the year before I graduated. And while he was there, for whatever reason, he decided to tell the recruiters, he's like, yeah, look, I've got this friend back at UM who is like the stuff. You guys shouldn't even bother to interview because they do the interviews on campus and then they pick out of that a pool of people to then send to Seattle to interview on campus at Microsoft. So he's like, you guys shouldn't even bother to interview him at UM. You should just bring him up. In fact, you really should just hire him. What are you guys even thinking? So they were like, oh, really? Okay. So
wow, we all need friends like that. Advocate on our behalf and our agent.
Of course he didn't tell me any of this, right? So I hear from them, they're like, oh yeah, so we hear your hot stuff, so we're gonna bring you on for this interview. And they grilled me. But at the end of the interview, they said, yeah, we want you to come here for an internship. So I said, yes, this would be great. It's a paid internship. I could save some money and stuff like that. When I graduated at the time, I had admission to Stanford for computer science after my undergrad. So I was on my way to Stanford, actually. I come to Microsoft, and about a month into my internship, they're like, you know what, we want you to stay full time. And, I kind of did the math, and I was like, well, I could stay here and not starve, or I could go to school and be a starving TA or something. And so I decided to stay, and I never told Stanford I wasn't coming, so there's somebody waiting for their TA to show up still, probably. You're like, somebody promised me a TA. Why hasn't this guy showed up? But for me, I remember, having decided that that's what I was going to do, talking to my parents, and they were like, what are you talking about? Because education in the Caribbean, especially during that, the period I was growing up, it was super important. So, people would send their kids away for years to go do school, right? And to better themselves and hopefully make the next generation have a greater set of opportunities. So for them, they totally understood the idea of me going to Stanford. This thing called Microsoft, right? To them, just like, what is that? So that was an interesting conversation.
And for reference, we're talking about the time when Windows was just coming out.
That's right. This was 92. So today, they would be like, yeah, okay, you get it. But back then, for somebody who wasn't in the States and kind of seeing what was happening and the personal computer revolution as such, taking another turn in the curve, that, they were like, we don't understand what you're doing here.
How did you convince your parents that it was the right decision?
Well, I was like, look, guys, it's not like you guys are going to somehow figure out how to have me not starve while I was at Stanford. So I was like, I'm getting a salary and I'm getting, and really, actually, the real kicker was that I said, look, if I went to Stanford, I would leave and I'd probably come back to a job like this anyway. Like, you know what I mean? Like I would get done and then I'd come back to try to do something like this because this is what I've been, wanting to do. And so I'm at ground zero, I might as well get in now.
Amazing story. And so you have this great arc of a career, which we could have a whole separate episode on at Microsoft.
Yeah. It was a fun 20 years for sure.
You're touching all of these, seminal products and points in that company's trajectory. So I'm sure you could write like a 3-volume book about that. But at some point after a while, something gives you an itch or something. Yeah. So tell us about that transition and what became Brick Lane eventually.
So, this was in sort of 2011, 2012 timeframe. And I was coming upon, 20 years there. I was about to turn 40. It was a good time to reflect. We were actually also coming to the end of a cycle. I at the time I was in the office, the business division, and in particular, working on office mobile productivity platforms and software and so on. And we were coming to the end of a big, sort of product cycle. And so it all kind of, shaped up to be a good time to just step back and think about what I wanted to do next. So that's sort of one sort of part of the background. The other part of the background is that, over the course of a period of time, I had connected significantly with the Seattle artistic scene, music in particular. And I had been, besides making music, I was also observing a certain, kind of disruption that was happening in the industry at the time. And this, the music industry has of course gone through a number of different disruptions. And this particular one is the one, out of which sort of the phoenix out of the ashes was streaming, really. And looking at it, I saw the independent music sector, independent artists and businesses and so on, really disproportionately negatively affected by the time of that disruption, which is also generally true. The independent sector tends to get hit hard. They tend to, hustle and come back and find new niches and so on. But in seeing that happen, I kind of thought, okay, well, I wonder if there's a way that I could help. Given that it was a time in my life that I was trying to decide what's the next big, kind of thing I was going to do, I decided, hey, I'm going to go do this, go start an independent music label. And I'm going to build it around a set of principles that I thought could be really engineered to be artist-focused and different, at least for the time, than what was typical. That led to the founding of Brick Lane Records. Something that move was something that, many people at the time didn't really understand.
I can imagine.
There are all these people who are like, dude, you're like, you're this GM at Microsoft and you're doing all this great stuff and, great trajectory, blah, blah, blah. You're going to go do what? And so, but, I felt it was important to me and to people I cared about. And so I decided to do it.
I mean, that's an amazing shift for sure. And I'm sure there are, just like there's people waiting for you in Stanford, there's probably some exec at Microsoft who was like, I thought he was going to take my job. Where'd he go?
Exactly.
I mean, it's a total different rhythm, right? I mean, it's
absolutely. And it's entrepreneurial at its heart, right? You're hustling, you're doing your own thing. It's very different from being in, sort of under the corporate wing. And, it is also a different rhythm just in terms of like, if you're connecting with artists, right? They're on a different schedule. They're on a different tip. You know what I mean? And so you have to really figure out how to, dig deep with them to get them to where they want to go. Part of me figuring out how to be there for them was that, I'm the kind of person that, if I'm going to go do something, I go super deep on it so that I have a lot of empathy for the people involved. And so making music, going on tour, sleeping in the basement of the Booker's house in Switzerland, right? With the cat banging on the... trying to get in, you know what I mean? All of that is part of understanding then what my artists would be going through because I did it too. So yeah, you had to kind of put yourself in different shoes for sure.
That's a great story. Well, and I want to hear more about Brick Lane, but we'll take a short break and we'll be right back with Kirt Debique from SyncFloor.
Hello, I'm Danielle Baldwin, Digital Marketing Director for Black Women Talk Tech. We are an organization created to identify, support, and encourage Black women to build billion-dollar businesses. We're on a mission to raise the profile of Black women founders in tech, and so we invite you to our Face of a Founder Summit, November 17th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. The summit is totally virtual and brings together our community of entrepreneurs, investors, and partners to promote Black women tech founders and address funding needs across the tech startup sector. Join us and hundreds of tech entrepreneurs who will attend and receive group mentorship on how to continue fundraising despite the additional challenges posed by 2020. Attendance is free, but spots are limited. Join us by RSVPing at bit.ly/FOF Summit. We look forward to seeing you for this exciting and engaging event.
So we're back with Kirt Debique from SyncFloor. And so, Kirt, we were just hearing kind of the origins and evolution of Brick Lane. And you mentioned these principles that were foundational for how you wanted to set up Brick Lane and how you ran it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. And you know, there's a lot more talk now about, because, you know, we live in a world that has a lot more transparency, right? People can, you know, kind of get on a platform and talk about what bothers them about anything, really, nowadays, right? And lots of people can hear about it. So there's a lot more transparency about the issues that are at play, or that were at play, and it's still, to some degree, are at play in the industry. You know, when I kind of came at it, I said, okay, one of the things that I was seeing was that for an artist, when you back them with, you know, sort of funds to do their project and to help them manage their life while they're doing their project, you know, it's essentially a loan. Like, and you know, there are lots of ways to talk about it and stuff like that. And typically the industry talks about, okay, here's your advance, and you have to recoup through that advance. The advance includes what's, you know, set up for the recording budget and things like that. But, you know, in our case, you know, what we were seeing is that because you have to recoup, a lot of people are always underwater, right? So after they kind of get the thing done and they market it, etc., and some amount of the budget's eaten for that, and you know, making sure that they're somewhat taken care of during the process of recording and so on, and support for touring and all that, you know, they're still now waiting for enough to get made back to recoup through that before they start to see revenue. And so we said, hey, what if we looked at it actually in some sense more like, you know, people invest in startups today, right? Where it's certainly a risk, but you're saying that I'm going to invest in you, right? And in the idea that you're going to do well in the future, and we both reap the benefit at the same time. That's kind of the first thing that we said as a principle, is that this is an investment, not a loan. The other thing we said is that you don't get locked in. So really, you know, our thing was that, you know, as a small label, there are certain things we could do for you as you started up. But what we would gladly see happen is that you graduate to the next level. You graduate to, you know, a bigger label. You graduate to a greater publishing deal. You know, all of the things that show that you get to the next level and have the next level of opportunities. We're going to make it so that you're not locked in. You do a project with us. If that project gets you to that next level, great. If you want to do another project with us, we can, you know, do that too. But there wasn't any lock-in. That's
not the norm, right?
That's not, and that was certainly back then. That wasn't the norm. The other thing is we said that the splits were always artist majority. So, you know, and you know, this is much more par for the course now, where, you know, somebody might say, okay, well, it's at least 50-50. But we were always like, look, back then, you know, people were always, again, behind on, you know, what percentage of the goodness they got accrued to them. And we said that we would always do artist majority. And so, you know, with all those things kind of at play, you know, we felt that we were coming up with a set of principles that could attract an artist because we were really philosophically aligned with them and could be super transparent about that alignment. At the same time, I think it confused people in the industry at the time. I remember, you know, one of the artists we signed, you know, when we were negotiating with their legal team, they asked us straight out. They were like, "Are you guys a nonprofit?" You know,
which of course you weren't, right?
And I was like, "Well, not exactly. We just think, you know, it's a good way to treat the artists, or something like that." So you know, it just wasn't you know the way things were done typically. Today, in today's world, there are so many more avenues for artists to do things that you know they have more savvy and more leverage. in some ways they also have less leverage because there's so much music out there, right? So you're still trying to find opportunity, and that actually is, the thing that gets to the genesis of SyncFloor. But we said, hey, we're gonna do this thing. We signed artists. We put out some beautiful music. So that ultimately, when I look back at my life, I'm always gonna look back at that and feel like we did a great thing. We helped some really wonderful artists make beautiful music and put it out into the world, and give back to the world in a way that makes it a better place.
So I listened to one particular artist in my research.
Really?
Kirt Debique. How'd you sign him? He must have been a tough sell.
Yeah, that was the worst. That guy and his team. They were paid. But yeah, like I say, I definitely spend time making music myself, and as a form of expression and a way, for me, part of it was a way of healing, from some things that had happened in my life. But yeah, like I said, it gave me a lot of empathy for what artists go through, is just going through that process as well.
And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if I look back at this arc of your career, because I know you worked in Windows Media, you've kind of touched all of the aspects of kind of the music creation journey, from production and consumption to being an artist, to being the distribution mechanism, or the Patreonic version, I guess, which is the labels, right? So
I should have had you back then. I'd be like, no, this is what we are.
And having those principles of empathy and equity and wanting to level the playing field and make it sort of a more welcoming on ramp for artists is a pretty powerful position. And I have a hunch, as you alluded to, that this helped set up the vision or the concept or the catalyst for SyncFloor. So tell us about how that came about.
So going back to sort of that time period of jumping in to start the label. To set a little bit of context, I'll actually talk a little bit about meeting my co-founder. So my co-founder, Sejan McFarlane, she is an IP attorney. And we met because she was lead outside counsel for Microsoft on these large transactions that I was also the technical lead on. And so we worked really well together and we became friends. And these were really complex transactions, like high value and 100+ page contract type things, right? So we were like, yeah, we have a pretty good sense about how to navigate the complex IP waters and transactional waters. So when I left to start the label, I said, hey, I'm going to need good counsel. I have a friend who's like a fantastic counsel. Was a partner at Preston Gates Ellis and things like that. So I said, hey, you want to come on this journey with me? And she was like, yeah, sure. She's like, how hard can it be? Like, we've done all this hard stuff. It's good. It's music. So famous last words.
Little did you know.
So it turned out to be actually, quite the challenge. But we learned a lot. We learned a lot over the course of, before founding, SyncFloor, which was in 2017. So we spent, 5 years doing work with, on Brick Lane. And we learned enough about the music business to kind of say, there's some areas where we think we can do better. Just like there were areas we felt, with the label, we could do some things better for artists. We saw that you have a situation where artists, and in particular in sync, in music licensing for productions, ads, film, TV, the access to opportunity was something that was really difficult because navigating that ecosystem was difficult for both parties in terms of connecting. And so it became something that was really wrapped up in, sort of how you navigate a network of relationships. And you might have the perfect piece for a production, just nobody knows about you, right? And that happens in the world, certainly, but we felt that there was to an extreme in some sense. And an extreme that, sort of took away from opportunity for a sector that we thought had a lot of fantastic things to say and a lot of great music that could lift narratives. So we kind of sat and thought about that. And then, the other thing that happened is that we said, well, if you're going to go build a business around trying to connect these ecosystems, you want to look carefully at what the market looks like, and what sort of the market opportunity looks like, and figure out, is it venture scale or not? Are you even going to be going down the path of trying to engage in venture capital funding around it and things like that? And what we felt we saw was that you have trends on the production side, so the media production side, and that essentially you have a new golden age of entertainment, right? With lots of new money coming in to make that entertainment from players like Netflix and Amazon and Apple and so on and so forth. You have a new age of advertising where, sort of social advertising and video as a lingua franca for advertising, right? Where everybody now says this is the way you communicate effectively with consumers.
Right.
Is driving a ton of new production in that space. You have sort of new media, right, coming up, right? So, podcasting as a great example. So those are being created. You have essentially the passion economy, right? You have consumers as creators and freelancers and individuals who are creators. The more creators you have and the more content being created, all of that creates this incredible drag-in force on the need for music, right? Music as the thing that is a differentiator, a lifter of narratives, a way of communicating emotion. And so we said, wow, okay, more than maybe people realize, there's this big sucking sound that's gonna, sort of say, hey, whoa, you gotta find a way for those people to more effectively and efficiently connect, and in some sense be able to even self-serve connect into an ecosystem for music. And then we looked at the music ecosystem, and especially the independent sector, where we think that there's a lot of great music to support. And we said, wow, it's a very fragmented ecosystem. And so, by the way, is the ecosystem of agencies and production companies and so on that actually make the stuff on the media side. But it's a very fragmented ecosystem on the music side, especially in this independent sector. There's a large amount of music. You have the barrier to entry for creating music has gone way down. And so therefore the volume and supply of music has gone way up. And so you have something like 60 million, I think, commercial music tracks on Spotify today. 40,000 plus tracks a day being uploaded. And so you have this vast sea of stuff in a very fragmented ecosystem. And so in some sense, you have almost the perfect state of affairs for creating, sort of infrastructure, connective tissue to bring these ecosystems together. And so that's when we said, okay, we think there's a venture scale opportunity for applying technology to more efficiently connect creative communities.
That makes a lot of sense.
We built it around this concept of natural language music search, right? Because we said, okay, well, what's the thing that, differentiates us, right? And we actually ended up finding that there were 3 core things that differentiate us. Number one is that we were talking about great content, right? And that's a very important driver of anything that you want to do in the media sphere, right? And we had differentiated great content that we thought we could get access to, right? And in particular, because it was so fragmented, we could add value to them by aggregating, right? And so that was interesting. The other one is that we had an inkling that there was this problem that, people on the media side were expressing a desire for music in very creative, very natural terms, and that had to sort of asynchronously get out into the ether to a set of people that might, try to interpret it, respond with some stuff, and then the person on that side has to collect all of that stuff and put it together in a way they can actually dig through, and then actually go through to the productive process of trying to, find what they want.
That makes a lot of sense, because I know that I've worked with a few audio people, and they'll say things like, yeah, it sounds like Justin Bieber, a song by him wrapped in tinfoil with double speed.
Exactly.
And it's like, I don't, what does that mean?
We actually spent a lot of time analyzing. We had access to a significant corpus of these creative briefs, essentially. And so we analyzed them, trying to say, well, is there like a common factor that we can derive that points us in the direction of building technology, building IP that could be differentiated for taking that kind of expression and turning it into music results out of an aggregated ecosystem of great music. And so that's the other thing we said, okay, well, we had an insight that said, if you could do that, then you would have transformed creative discovery, right? Creative professional discovery. And that front door, that differentiated front door, would bring in a lot of really interesting transactional flow. And then finally, the other piece was that the rights regime around music is very complicated. The analogy I tend to use is I'd tell people that, today, music is kind of like if you went to Airbnb and you searched around for a while, you find something, you're like, this is the place, right? And you're like, okay, now you're tense because you're like, I got to get it before somebody else books it.
Right.
So you send it to the host, you're like, yeah, I love this place, I'm thinking of booking it. Now imagine if the host then said, well, hang on, I need to talk to my roommates, and also I need to talk to the super, and I think I have to find the building owner and talk to them. And there's a guy down the street at the pub. I gotta talk to him, right? And I have to talk to his mom.
That's a great analogy. Oh my gosh. Wow.
You know, right? And so that's how it works today. And so there's a, you know, in some sense, an alternative path within the industry where, because that's been so difficult, people have started to, and there's a more and more of a trend of this, they've started to collect the representation of rights under single entities, right? They find ways to end up being what we call one-stop in the industry, right? So, you know, this single entity has figured out, either because of the contract they have with the artist or the contract that they have with the artist, a label and a publisher or what have you, they've managed to actually put everything into one nice, neat box, and they're like, I can rep this, you know, into some ecosystem. But what we found actually was there was a trend that more and more labels and publishers, so labels are becoming publishers as well, and publishers are becoming labels as well. They're all essentially trying to prevent this issue of somebody with 2% of a part of a thing saying, no, I don't like that deal. That doesn't work. So they've all just, you know, in their own self-interest trying to solve that problem. And so because of that, we said, oh, well, if that's the trend, we can go focus on that content. So we can find great content, high quality, high production value content that has consolidated rights. And if we could learn enough about it, if we could crawl those things, we don't like, just like Airbnb, we don't have to own your house, right? You don't have to have the keys to your house. You just need to know about it, right? So we're building a search engine that knows about the one-stop great quality content in all of these aggregated independent partners that we have. And on top of that search system, we could then build more things. We could make it even more visual. We could include cultural references. So you could say, you know, this movie out of your library, like, I want something that has the feel of the sound of that movie. And then, having gotten them there, we can say all of the other workflow things that you care about, collecting the set of alts you want and sharing it with others on the team, getting direct access to downloads so you could try it in your edits, being able to go through a licensing workflow that was simple, you know, and all that. We could build all that around it. So end to end, you could go from desire for music to acquisition of the rights for the music for your production in a way that didn't have all of this pain and fear and friction.
I love it. I think you've totally nailed it. The macro trends are all feeding this need for a marketplace that streamlines discovery and workflow and access to licensing. So it seems relatively obvious, as you say it, as the big opportunity. But I want you to take me to that decision point of rock star in the corporate world at Microsoft, you know, label mogul with Brick Lane.
I don't know if mogul would apply, but you know, but aspiring mogul perhaps. You know?
There you go. How do you step in and then say, okay, let me make this third act, which is I got to kind of start from scratch, and nobody's going to know anything about what we have a great insight. How do you make that decision to say, okay, we're going to go build a tech company?
The tech company part of it wasn't the hard part. I mean, I know I can build big systems. I've done it enough times and things like that. I hadn't built a startup before, and so that, you know, was a whole different can of worms. I would say, you know, there's a part of this that I have to thank my mom for, right? Like my mom is an interesting cat. I've never seen her afraid to try anything. Right? You know, my mom's the person who, you know, she was a teacher, a math teacher in Trinidad. You know, she jumped out of that and she decided to take, you know, her kids to the States and do something different there. She went and did, you know, special ed, went and got her special ed doctorate. She's the type of person who always, like, if she saw something that she thought she, you know, had a passion around, even if it took a lot of jumping in with, you know, without seeing where you're going to land, you know, kind of thing, she would just do it. You know, I got a little bit of that. If I really have a belief in something, and in this case, it was an extension of a belief that I could help, you know, an artistic community that I cared about, and that there was a way to create better access to opportunity, then I'll go do it. You know, I know there are plenty of things I don't know, but we'll figure it out. You know, I have to thank my co-founder who, after the first part of like going, oh, how hard could that be? And then we had 5 years of learning the music industry. I was like, so how hard could it be for us to do a startup, really? And she's like, I think I heard this before, but all right, let's do it.
Nah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And that's just two key things I want to bring out for the audience, which is, one is this concept of just going for it, just do it. It's kind of the Nike slogan. And stepping in, part of entrepreneurship is stepping in where there's unknowns. And so you have to have some comfort, but also this idea of having a co-founder.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people ask me, like, should I have a co-founder? And I always say having another voice to collaborate with. Forget about the sort of like how you look on paper and dividing the labor and all that. Just being able to talk to somebody else about these things, everything from the small decisions to, should we partner? Should we do this? So I hear both of those things as kind of maybe some important aspects.
Absolutely. It's so important. Like, look, life is better when you do it together. You know what I mean? There's something to this idea of being able to carry water together, right? In any kind of thing, whether it's in your relationship, in your life, or your business partnership, or what have you. I'm always fond of saying to the team, onward and upward. We're on a long, long, long climb. We're on K2 or something like that, right? And every once in a while you stop along the way and you reflect, but you have to kind of look up again and go, okay, we're going up there. And sometimes that person over there is going to carry the pack and sometimes you're going to carry the pack. But it's one of those things where having a co-founder is so essential to sanity on a journey that has a lot of, not just a lot of unknowns, but a lot of hardships, as well as a lot of things that you want to celebrate along the way. And when you look to your left or you look to your right and you want to even celebrate something, right there, it's nice to have somebody there because it rejuvenates you. And then in the times when, you can't carry the water for whatever reason, I think, we've talked, when we met before, I told you, my 6.5-month-old son, he was born with a severe heart defect and, we had open heart surgery in August and we were actually also in the middle of a fundraise, as it turns out, during that time. Right. And, being able to have somebody while you have to kind of go do something else, be able to carry the water on something, that's.
That's amazing. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. This has been a great conversation so far, but we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back with Kirt Debique from SyncFloor.
Hello, I'm Danielle Baldwin, Digital Marketing Director for Black Women Talk Tech. We are an organization created to identify, support, and encourage Black women to build billion-dollar businesses. We're on a mission to raise the profile of Black women founders in tech, and so we invite you to our Face of a Founder Summit, November 17th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. The summit is totally virtual and brings together our community of entrepreneurs, investors, and partners to promote Black women tech founders and address funding needs across the tech startup sector. Join us and hundreds of tech entrepreneurs who will attend and receive group mentorship on how to continue fundraising despite the additional challenges posed by 2020. Attendance is free, but spots are limited. Join us by RSVPing at bit.ly/FOF Summit. We look forward to seeing you for this exciting and engaging event.
So we're back with Kirt from SyncFloor. So Kirt, tell us about the dynamic of being CEO and CTO of your company at the same time. That's a pretty unusual thing to maintain. How are you thinking about that?
I would say in the early stages of a startup, you simply wear many hats. Like that's you know what I mean. Whether they are formally titled hats or not, you wear a lot of hats. In our case, making clear that there was an aspect of my job, given my background, right, that was about the deep technical expertise that it would take to actually to accomplish the vision we had for a transformation in music discovery. That was important to telegraph, right? So having the formal title was useful in that sense, right? And people go, oh, okay. And you kind of do what you need to do. Now, in the long run, right, at some point you have to get out of the business of wearing all the hats, because it's the way you get to scale, right? The team, the business, etc. And that's really important at certain points in time. But we're still early enough that there's a certain kind of cohesiveness that you get, right? There's a thing that they talk about, that founders need to be deeply, deeply passionate about the product direction, and they need to have enough passion about the product implementation to be able to really wax poetic about it when they talk to people where that matters. They need to be the first salespeople, right? Like you're doing hand-to-hand combat to bring in, the first, customers or in our marketplace, the first suppliers and all that kind of stuff. And so you can't really shy away from any of it, right? You have to just be part of all of it. So again, whether that's expressed or unexpressed in terms of title, right? You're doing many of the jobs. And it's just, as you scale, you start to figure out, well, where can I bring in skill sets that complement or enhance and augment what we have? And how do I put myself in a position to go tackle the next important challenge that we have as a company?
So I imagine that both of those titles won't be yours for the rest of the history of SyncFloor.
I'd imagine so too. And so, but you know, you do what you have to at the time. And, you know, insofar as that, you know, I actually wrote a bunch, you know, most of the code that runs the service. It's, you know, it's appropriate for me to go and be the person that talks about it at a level of technical depth when that's warranted.
Sure. You mentioned in the last segment a little bit about fundraising, and I know you participated in an accelerator program. So maybe tell us a little bit about the fundraising journey for SyncFloor so far.
That was something that, you know, I hadn't done at all, you know, coming into doing a startup. And sort of that in and of itself is a journey. And you know, fundraising is taxing work, right? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think anybody should close their eyes to that fact as such. But I think one of the things that's been really, that I found always with each round that we did, I found that it really made us step back, think really, really critically about where we were, and be really crisp about our narrative, not just in terms of where we came from, but where we were going. So, you know, narrating our vision, you know, getting to some degree our own conviction about the steps that it would take to get from A to B, and be able to really clearly express that. That exercise is you know, really always important for a startup to be doing continuously and refining continuously. Because that exercise comes into play when you're selling, when you're recruiting, when, you know, everything, right? You're kind of having that conversation about who you are, where you came from, where you're going, why that's important. So let's see. So when we founded the company in March 2017 and, you know, spent the first year really just underground, hacking away at stuff, building the first prototypes, really trying to again see if we could build this differentiated IP that did something that was actually fairly difficult. We got to the point where we felt that was, you know, sort of pretty well done. So, you know, and showed promise. And so at that point we raised a friends and family round. And from there we kind of said, okay, well, you got a marketplace. And so marketplace have, of course, the chicken and egg problem.
Right.
And so we said, okay, well, we're going to take what we've built and we're going to go after supply first, which is a fairly typical choice for marketplaces, is to go get supply. And in particular, we felt that we could, you know, market ourselves as a tool for our suppliers, especially the larger ones, to be able to mine their own catalogs in response to creative briefs. And so that gave us sort of a single player mode. This allowed us to get in front of, you know, various folks. We used the network that we had from being, you know, having a label. And so got in front of various folks, had them trying stuff out. It became a really great proxy for understanding what the searches that would eventually come in were and how they were evolving, because you're essentially getting those people to use those briefs to search, you know, on behalf of those clients. So you're getting a lot of interesting data that helped us refine the search engine and tune the model for it and so on. So we spent another good year plus on that, on building supply and building that ecosystem, and getting to a credible point in terms of thinking about a launch. And that was when we said, okay, we think it's time. We're still at pre-seed, but we think if we can, it's time to attract some institutional investment, because it'll take us to the next level and prepare us for a journey that we think is going to require, you know, stages of investment to really go after the growth and the very, very large opportunity that we see.
So once you decided to do that, help the listeners understand. So how do you go about finding institutional investors? Because this is usually the big question people have about connections and networks and intros. And so how did you think about it?
So one thing, there's I don't want to call it mythology as such of the founder, right? You think about the, early 20s person in the garage and, that kind of thing, kind of coming up and getting the big break. And, I think a lot of people have found that the reality of that is different, right? Either, if you're just coming up, sometimes you get a lucky break, but a lot of times it's because you have some network that you're able to leverage in some way. I think also the stats show that, sort of the average age of founders is a little older than most people probably think. Getting to a point where you could go take this kind of risk, sometimes it's helpful to be able to say, okay, well, I've gotten to a point in my career where I can, at least for a year or 2 years or whatever, go try this other thing and not, have, the rest of my life go upside down. So, I think in my personal case, it was that, I had a 20-year career at Microsoft. You meet a lot of people, in that time. And if you do good work and establish great relationships in that context, when you're doing something new, people are like, hey, what are you up to? Like, oh, yeah, wow, that's kind of crazy and interesting. How can I help? And so you find ways to kind of connect with people. And there's no straight line. The way we met the person who is the founder of the VC, that is our lead VC investor, was, through another connection that we'd known, someone we'd known for a time at Microsoft. He moved on to another, business. And, we kind of continued to cultivate and talk about what we were doing because he could give us some really interesting advice. And ultimately, he was like, oh, you know what? I think there's somebody that I know that would be, a good conversation. Why don't you guys talk? And so in talking to his name's Kirby Winfield, from Ascend Venture Capital, in talking to him, he had significant passion about music, had a really good sense for what we were trying to do and why that was an interesting venture scale opportunity. I think once you get one person with a deep passion invested in what you're doing, right? And invested emotionally and intellectually. But once you get that first thing, then as they're trying to think about things, they're also thinking, oh, who else should I talk to think about vetting what you're talking about? And you start to meet more people in that community. And we also had like some, great, friends in things like Kirt Debique and who could point us at, because, a lot of, when you think about who then goes in and becomes part of the VC community, you're going to find a lot of people who they themselves were, at some point in, the business or corporate world or what have you. So you get connected into that way. So we had the good fortune of being able to leverage a career, a long-standing career, and a network to then meet people and find the people that were really interested in and invested in what we were doing. One of the things that's hard about fundraising is that you hear a lot of no's, right? And you can certainly take away from that there's something wrong with what you're doing, right? And so you have to have a lot of conviction as a founder about what you're doing and realize that, people's reason for saying no is simply that they don't see what you see. And it's not that there's anything wrong with what you see, it's just they don't see it, or they're not passionate about it, or it doesn't match their thesis, or they are not at the right point in their fund to take that particular risk right now, or there are a million different reasons.
Yeah, so I'm hearing 3 key points here, which is really great. One is leverage the heck out of your network, and no matter what size it is or how long you've been in the professional world or your personal connections, you have some network, so leverage that as much as you can. Second is, this is very underestimated. If I had to boil it down, I would say 80% of fundraising is finding that first entity or person who is passionate and willing to go out on a limb, so to speak, and maybe think about who else can syndicate with this. And the other 20% is then the paperwork of finding those other people or talking to them and saying, well, in this case, Kirby, if Kirby's in, then I'm in, right?
Yeah. It bears repeating on that particular point that you want somebody that is really passionately, intellectually invested and ideally also emotionally invested. Because emotion isn't a bad thing in this sense, right? It's that they actually really feel it in their bones that, like, this is something that is going to change the world, right? And you want that. Like, so you as a founder, you are interviewing those people as well, right? Even if, there's this idea of, whether it's smart money or anything like that, you're what you want, especially at the early stages, isn't money for money's sake, right? You want people who actually really are like, no, you're doing something here. And not only am I going to invest in you, but I want to help you succeed, not just because of my investment, but because I think it's going to change something important. And so I'm going to find ways, I'm going to dig deeper, right, to find ways to help you on that journey.
And that's the third point, is this idea that not everybody's going to get it. And the reality is, if you're a startup that's going to be disruptive and change the world in major impactful ways, you're doing things in a way that hasn't been done before. And so by definition, if it was straightforward and clear and obvious and everybody would understand it, then everybody be doing it. And so it is definitely not to be taken that an investor saying no means you don't have opportunity and that you're not onto something. And like you said, there's a bunch of other reasons that investors pass that really almost have nothing to do with you. Is it fit their ownership model? Is it a space that they know, or maybe they don't want to branch off into that space? One of my friends who's an entrepreneur says, I don't judge my progress in fundraising by yeses. I judge it by no's, because I know I have to get to a certain amount of no's before I'm going to get that yes. So I chase the no's to get them out of the way.
Exactly. Chase the no's. That's right. Exactly. You're going to get a lot of those. You got to find that, going back to your thing about co-founders, right? Having somebody to commiserate with after your umpteenth no, right? That's another, it's like you support each other right through that journey.
Absolutely. And so that's one of my questions is, so you're kind of an Afro-Caribbean heritage, your co-founder's a woman. How do you look at that in terms of, has that been beneficial? Has it been a challenge, either, internal dynamics or externally how you're viewed as a team?
So because I think we both have such long-standing careers and, sort of we have the receipts. When somebody, without having met us, right, which, biases are insidious things, right? Like they come out in ways people don't even realize whether they have that intent or not. And they come out in ways that may even be before they see you, right? Because they make a certain assumption, right? So we have enough paper receipts that we tend to be able to get past some of that. We also live in a time where there's more awareness and desire, and we live in a bit of a bubble, like, in terms of the people we deal with most of the time, and where we are here in the Northwest. But what we found is that there's a lot of more awareness now, and a lot more desire now to try to combat some of those, insidious biases. In that sense, I think, our combination as founders is something people look at and go, oh, well, let's have a conversation with those guys, But it can be rough out there, and it's a sad thing in that this journey is hard enough as it is, right? Without piling that nonsense on for founders of color or for female founders.
Yeah, and I like your point about how the lens is changing and the awareness is changing, because I do think, especially in 2020, one of the outcomes we're seeing is that it's kind of like that. I don't know if you ever watched the movie Field of Dreams, right? Where towards the end, they kind of his family starts to see the players, and I think it's his sister-in-law is like, where'd all these players come from? And it's like, where did all these people of color who are founders come from? It's like, well, we've been here.
There's on LinkedIn, I see posts by this guy, Stephen Wolf Pereira. He posts executives of color. Like, I think he might even be doing it once a day. It's actually it's fantastic. Like, he basically was just like, okay, look, you guys have been saying that there aren't enough of these people around to get into your leadership teams, your C-suite, blah, blah, blah thing. And he's like, all right, I'm going to show you that this is nonsense. And just every day, just bam, he's like, here's this person, these qualifications, this huge role, blah, blah, blah. Just every day, he's just like, whack, whack, whack. It's really fantastic to see, actually. I was like, wow, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we started this podcast, was to say, hey, there's not a pipeline problem. So we're coming to the end of our time here. This has been a great conversation, Kirt. Is there any way that our audience can be helpful to SyncFloor?
Sure. Come talk to me. Come, if you have perspective on it, certainly if you're in the audience where you're, in media production, if you're in advertising or film or TV or what have you, if you're a creative director or producer or an editor or anything of that, I'm your guy. Come talk to us. Come check out what we have. If you know people, tell them to come talk to us and check out what we have. That's the space we're in now, is that we're about to embark on sort of the, sort of big go bring people in the door kind of thing. Like, not because they were working with us to kind of validate the product, but because this is going to be part of their daily workflow. And so the more perspective we have on that, the more people coming through the door, the faster we iterate on the product, the faster we go, all of those things. And so, come chat.
Awesome. And why don't you share how people can get in touch with you, or your URL or social handles?
Our website is syncfloor.com, syncfloor.com. My email address is Kirt, Kirt, @syncfloor.com. Feel free to send me a note anytime. On Twitter and Instagram, I am at Katiweo, which is one of my middle names, an African middle name, and it's Katewayo at Katiweo. And so, find me on any of those.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Kirt. This has been an incredible conversation, and we really appreciate it. We wish you success and obviously continued recovery for your son. And so thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Dan. Really great to be here.
We'd like to thank our guest, Kirt Debique, and our sponsor, Black Women Talk Tech. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or simply go to foundersunfound.com/listen to. That's listen, T-O, and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Founders Unfound. This podcast was produced by Dan Quijana, editing and production by Albert Holguin. Our music was composed by Kirt Debique, Enrique Malano Jimenez, and Michael Quijana. Social media and other promotion by Umama Marzouk and Anisha Barnett. I am Dan Quijana, and you've been listening to Founders Unfound.